So thank you so much for having me. I think I'm losing Instagram and Facebook followers because since I've been here since Saturday, I've been posting dozens of messages expressing my enthusiasm, for creativity of Estonia, people in Tallinn, design, food ideas. So I'm now actually this morning I started delete some messages because people think they're probably paying me, but everything Demiano said about the symposium being, I think, one of the strongest events in years, at least among one attended, it's very true. So my presentation will have a slightly different title because the original title, if I would do original title, I would really have to show projects, and I think I want to focus more about the ideas. So I will show some projects, but towards the end of my talk. So the new title is Making Strange with Big Data. Well, so we created the lab in 2007. So for about 8 years, we've been studying what we call big cultural data. So question, of course, we have some standard industry definitions of big data, but what is a big cultural and social data? Well, so I think one answer is to say this is data sets which are simply larger than whatever it is people use in their fields before. So let's say you may have some textbook about history of 20th century architecture, and it may have 200 or 250 names of architects. So if you now analyze, 2,500 or 25,000, that's big data. So it's really relative. Right? Another answer is to say that the big cultural data and big social data is characterized, right, by a better coverage. So there's a higher temporal and or spatial resolution than a particular field. When a particular field was using previously. Here we go. Okay. So for example, let's say if in America we do census every 10 years, right, and you collect, lots and lots of kind of deep data about people, but you do it every 10 years. So if you can be able to find similar information by using Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook data, and then you can update these things, for example, every day. Right? That's what I mean by higher temporal spatial resolution. Right? Another thing which is very important about resolution is that the 20th century social science and public opinion is based on very small samples. So for example, Gallup is going to call 1,000 people across the US and ask them some questions about how do we feel, and then you will publish a survey, and you can do it every day. But obviously, if you're reducing 300 million people to 100 people sample, you're going to miss lots and lots of small regional patterns. Okay? So in terms of actual kind of data stuff, we can say that the cultural and let's say social data may consist from two kinds of items. One is the cultural artifacts, novels, paintings, Instagram photos, buildings, building designs, articles, architectural magazines, so the actual content. And the second would be records of cultural actions. For example, in the case of social media, the actions would be commenting, liking, resharing, looking, but also you can put sensors in a museum, right? You can say, where do people move? How do their eyes move when they look at paintings? What pages you read when you read the text? And I think the second thing is very important, right? Because the humanities, as it developed in the last couple of 100 years, has really focused on the first thing, which is the study of cultural artifacts. And the study of reception, which is how people interact, right, with cultural artifacts and how we engage in cultural activity. Talking, for example, while watching a movie was very hard to study because we didn't really have the data. So we can say that this big data revolution, in terms of cultural analysis, it's really a revolution because it allows us for the first time to study in detail reception, right, or interaction, right? So of course, in the case of playing a video game, you're not just passively looking at the game, you're actually playing it, right? So the study of reception, or what cultural studies used to call reception, is one area where I think big data and the sensors make a big impact. So now I want to offer you some set of ideas or set of questions, which are behind our work and kind of a result of our practical work with lots and lots of cultural data sets. So in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to try to connect modern art, statistics, science, data science, and data visualization. So first of all, I want to point out, right, I mean, since the title is Making Strange with Big Data, one very, very strange thing. But normally when you think about history of modern art and history of modern visual representation, you think about abstract art, right? Something which is developed in the first decades of 20th century, where people no longer paint realistic representational forms, but we paint abstract things. And when we paint abstract things, we make a kind of data visualization, right? A kind of data science of society. So when Mondrian paints boogie, Broadway Boogie Woogie, he abstracts the structure of New York City into a kind of, a grid structure. He's a kind of data scientist. But what's interesting is that the statistical graphs, right, which developed in the early 19th century, prefigure modern abstraction by 100 years, and they're basically engaged in the same project of abstracting, right, reality. In this case, the reality is economic and social data, and using the kind of abstract visual shapes to represent this abstracted knowledge. Right? And it's very, very interesting, again, I don't have like a reason why, but it's interesting to speculate about these parallel histories and why we never really met until 10 years ago. So this is, for example of early statistical graphs from, oh my God, I'm so sorry guys, I promise I'm not doing it. It's, no, seriously, I'm not doing it on purpose. No, seriously. So this is basically already statistical graphs by 1820s. I mean, you can say very, very developed, right? The difference between them and what we're doing now is that we have big data and things are animated, but the ideas are the same. So you're basically representing economic prices or results of statistical surveys, something about population of countries, through these abstract representations, right? And then 100 years later, like people like Piet Mondrian are kind of going from the same process, right? So this is 3 very famous paintings of Mondrian, where you can see the language of abstraction emerging in the course of a few years. So first he paints a more realistic tree, and then he slowly abstracts it. So you kind of wonder, right, about these 2 processes of abstraction and why they have been separated by 100 years. Okay? So now let's continue with kind of comparison of the kind of artistic modern project and the modern science project. So let's say modern art, right, but also let's say 19th century art, shows general through the concrete. So you show general types, right, let's say a worker, by painting a particular worker. Now the science, right, since the 18th century, 17th century, is also interested in general, right, but it's not interested in particular. So it's only interested in general laws. So you want a model to explain the regular, and a typical example would be linear regression, which of course becomes a kind of social science tool in the 20th century. Okay? So this is a couple of examples, right? So this is basically how modern science, even statistics in particular, and social science, sociology, economics, and so on, want to talk about the world, right? So this would be a linear regression model, which is basically just a line you feed through the data, and this particular graph illustrates Okun's law in microeconomics, where supposedly GDP growth depends linearly on the changes in unemployment rate. So on the x-axis you have unemployment rate, and then on the vertical axis you have GDP. And then if you can draw a line using this kind of formula y equal x by b plus e, right? It's equation for this line, and this line gives a linear trend which captures the relationship between these 2 variables, but of course you have points all around it, right? So in the classical statistical thinking, this is the error. This is the variance, and this is something undesirable, right? Because what you want to do is you want to explain the social reality through this kind of simple formulas. So ideally you want, for example, to make a line or a curve which would go for all the points as close as possible, but it never happens. So the variability, the individuality, the uniqueness is thought of as an error. It's something which we unfortunately can't describe, but we wish it went away. Okay? And then to illustrate how the modern art, or classical art as well, deals with a particular in general, I mean, just because we are in Estonia and has a particular history. So this is a painting by wonderful Soviet artist Alexander Deineka, I think from 1950s, where he represents the healthy Soviet kind of cyborg, right, sports individuals. But obviously, right, they are very particular, right, people, and everyone is a bit different. So it's not some generic 3D model such as what you see behind me, right, in this primitive kind of VR thing. Yeah? Okay. So now, in the early 21st century, we can basically say, can we kind of combine these traditions, right? So you can say this is kind of one tradition of modern statistics, right, where you get rid of individual points, you get rid of variability, and you're basically concerned with general things. So first you visualize them, i.e. early 19th century, and then, let's say, by the 20th century, you develop tools such as linear regression, where now you're basically describing the relationship between variables, and again, you're not really concerned with deviations of these points from the law, right? So can we bring some of this kind of thinking, right, where we are dealing with general things in society, the patterns, for example, of tweets in Italian, but we're also interested in individual tweets. Okay? So I think this is basically probably the most important, I think, intellectual question for the next 20, 30 years at the intersection of culture, society, science, and big data. From my point of view, can we combine concrete and abstract? More specifically, can we create visualizations which show patterns but do not use summarization and abstraction? Okay? Yeah. So one, let's say, very simple solution which we've been to this very complex question which we've been exploring in our lab is use of visualization tools and hardware such as this wall made from dozens of LED monitors where, for example, we can load thousands of, let's say, social media images. So in this case, it's a data set of over 3,000 Instagram selfies from one of our projects, and when using the tools which are very similar to statistical graphs, such as scatter plots or histograms, to interactively sort and manipulate with images. And when you step out, you see the patterns, but when you come closer, you see the individual images, right? So you basically don't simply substitute, you don't simply substitute, right, the individual data points by these aggregates, but you kind of keep the points. And we have an example of this kind of work. In fact, if you go out, somehow it happens to be hanging next to the bathroom, but that's okay. So actually, it's a work from our lab, which is very similar. It's about 13,000 Instagram images, which we shared in Kiev during Maidan Revolution in February of last year. So we downloaded, and organized like all the images which we shared, and you'll see that there are these beautiful kind of day-to-night patterns, there are these waves, but at the same time you can, once you zoom in, once you come closer, these waves dissolve and you see individual particular Instagram photos. Okay. So again, continuing with the same topic, what I want to ask is, again, something very paradoxical, something which is very unthinkable. Right? So the science, including statistics, including social science, has really been about the general, right? Trying to explain general behavior, trying to explain things with elegant formulas, with laws, or let's say using statistical correlations or other statistical models such as linear regression. Right? But now we have computers which can allow us to analyze and hold in memory trillions, right, of points about your behavior, the coffee you're having in the morning, where you tweeted, where you took a bus, right? So the computers themselves don't have to aggregate the data. Okay? So does this new ability to collect, analyze, right, visualize, and explore massive amounts of data about the society, can this be used to create some kind of new science of individuals? The science which deals with individual events, individual Instagram photo, individual tweet, individual brick in a building, and not only the general. Right? So again, if modern science is concerned with regular and general, can we use big data to create a new science of individual, unique, and variable? Right? More practically, how to work with data without aggregating points into patterns. Because again, our typical idea about the data is that we have this raw data, and when we extract knowledge, or we have data, we extract patterns, and we kind of throw everything away. So what if we don't do it? Right? how we can create a kind of science, right, a kind of regular knowledge, not only about the patterns of society, not only about the general characteristics, but the knowledge which will really deal with variability, individuality, uniqueness of individual behaviors, individual events. I mean, it's a very difficult question. I don't have an answer, but I think it's only worth to live if you're asking impossible questions. So again, this is the example, one perhaps particular type of answer to this question. And again, this is very similar to what you're going to see in our artwork, in the exhibition. So here we have Instagram photos, which we shared in New York, the upper visualization, and in Tokyo, in the bottom visualization, during a few days in the spring of 2012. So basically downloaded all the photos which we shared in a kind of 5 by 5 kilometer area. And then we simply sorted these photos by their upload date and time. So it's a one-dimensional visualization. And you can see, again, this beautiful kind of day to night patterns, right? But because people were sharing more photos in New York, we're seeing 50,000 photos in the upper visualization, only accounts for about, 3 days, and the same 50,000 photos end up in 5 days. So if I would approach it as a scientist, as a data scientist, I would say, okay, well, I can come up with some simple equation which will describe the regular part of this pattern, right? The fact that, for example, images become darker during the night and they become overall lighter during the day, right? But then I'm going to lose all the variability, right? All the uniqueness, all the beauty of this individual sort of mosaic of people moments. And what I find interesting, right, about this kind of visualization is, in fact, you see the general patterns, but you can also see how every day is unique, right? Because some day people shared more, some day was a special event. So we use this kind of visualizations to try to kind of combine both our interest in patterns and also our concern to keep the variability, the individuality of particular events and behaviors. So the next point, right, is again to kind of go more directly to the title of the talk. So how can we use big data for making strange? And of course, making strange is a very well-known concept in cultural studies. The Russian word is устранение. The English word is defamiliarization. It was introduced by Russian literary critic and theorist Viktor Shklovsky around 1915. Where he said, well, the job of modern art is to make strange our everyday perception of reality. But I think that today, the art has become also part of our everyday kind of capitalist reality. So art doesn't have a power anymore to make anything strange, but it's definitely a good way to, sell real estate. But perhaps the data science or critical data science is the new art of our time. But regardless, we can say, how can we use data analysis and big data not to confirm what we know, but to question what we know, right? So, for example, rather than starting with existing social cultural categories, which is what people do in typical machine learning approach, how can we use big data to question our categories, right? So how can we use data analysis as an intellectual technology to question our existing concepts and ways of thinking about society and culture? And again, here's one example. So with our early work from about 2010, where we started by asking a very simple question. Okay, what are the different visual styles in manga, right? I mean, manga is, the Japanese comics. So here's a close-up. It's one of the most popular cultural forms around the world. And I didn't know anything about manga. In fact, I hate manga. I can't even finish a single manga book. So I said, that's great. It means I can study it scientifically, right? Like some kind of geologist or biologist studying microbes, right? I mean, I hate the content, so I can be very objective. And I said, okay, what are the basically visual styles in manga? So we downloaded a sample of 1 million, this is 1 million manga pages. And using simple tools, which me and my colleagues wrote in our lab, which we distribute as open source, by the way, we created visualizations such as this one. So here 1 million images is sorted in 2 dimensions, which in some ways correspond to kind of what you can see stylistically. So this is a kind of close-ups. So the close-up on the left is the upper, right? Is the upper border, the upper region of this kind of cloud of manga, and the close-up on the right is the bottom region. And you can see that if you look at the stylistic extremes, right? It's a completely different style. So one is very textured, lots of detail. Even the one on the right is much more simple, much more graphic, much more predictable. Those of you who are technically minded, what we're actually doing is sorting with 1 million images using entropy. Okay? And I thought, well, if we can sort the manga in this way, we're going to see some content, some islands of different styles. Instead, what you see is a complete continuity, right? So the extremes between the lower corner with one style and the upper corner with another style are completely filled in. Right? So what I realized is that in this case, the concept which I thought is so obvious, the concept of style, perhaps is an artifact of the fact that we never really dealt with big cultural data. Right? So if you walk around the city, you can say, well, here's some functionalist architecture, here's some ugly postmodern architecture, here's some creative reuse, such as this one. But what if you look at millions of buildings in European cities, you're probably going to find something like this. So you're actually going to find every possible combination, every possible stylistic monstrosity existing, and you may find that you have to rewrite the history of modern architecture, that what you think are particular styles are going to be exceptions, and the eclecticism, right, is going to be in fact the norm. Okay? Now, of course, you can also use these kind of visualizations for our ways. So to the extent that this is mapping, or this is telling us something about the stylistic diversity of manga, you can also say, okay, so why do the corners of this cloud not filled in? So why there is no manga like at the bottom right corner, and why there is no manga towards the left side of this cloud? So you can also use this as a kind of diagnostic tool. You can say, if I want to become a famous manga artist, I'm going to draw manga in the kind of areas, right, in the areas of this landscape where people haven't really done a lot. So you can also use it as a kind of diagnostic tool to see what has been developed, what has evolution evolved culturally, what's not. So I probably have, so I think I did about 20 minutes, right? Moderators are keeping time, right? So can I take, so I'm just going to take 10 minutes and just show projects. So I'm going to skip a lot. Just a moment. Okay, so we're going to skip all this. Okay, so we're just going to go kind of here. Yeah. So now I will kind of show you examples of some of our projects in the last 3 years where we analyze social media, particularly Instagram. And I think in the background of this analysis are these very general ideas which I try to present. Although sometimes I find that if I'm making a project today, it takes me 5 years to actually understand what the project was about. So I can't promise you that I will be able to beautifully connect every general idea presented with these particular projects. Okay. So this was our first attempt to kind of visualize the ocean, right, of Instagram photography. So we downloaded 2.3 million Instagram photos from 13 global cities. And again, we created with simple two-dimensional visualizations, which we call image plots, where images are sorted by simple visual characteristics. So here we're comparing 50,000 image samples from San Francisco on the left and the Tokyo on the right, and the images are sorted by average brightness, right, as you can see, and the average hue, which is the angle. And it becomes very, very hard to actually say, well, what do we see here? Is San Francisco and Tokyo completely different, or is San Francisco and Tokyo exactly the same? It really depends on your position, right? So of course, what this also shows you is that, depending on the kind of tools you use, the tools may be able to allow you to capture cultural differences or not. So if you basically simply take Instagram photos, you reduce them to the parameters of kind of color saturation, every city looks the same, because we're actually not looking at the content. So remember I said, maybe we're trying too hard, maybe we should do something more simple. And this is visualization which I already showed you 5 minutes ago. So this much more simple visualization where we're simply sorting images, right, of a city, we kind of city traces, a kind of city symphony, right? A city mosaic created by thousands of individuals using one dimension of time turns out to be better at capturing something about the difference between cities, right? Because you can see, for example, how many images are shared during the day versus the night. And you can see how different cities, in this case Tokyo on the upper, Tokyo at the bottom and New York on the upper part, we each have our own rhythm, right? We each have like our own kind of city symphony, so to speak. Okay? So now we begin to capture something about the different rhythms of the cities. And this is just a close-up. The actual visualization is about 20,000 pixels. And by the way, all these visualizations we've done in the last 7 years, there's like thousands of them are available on Flickr and Google+, so you can download any of them at the original resolution. So typically it's like 20,000, 30,000, sometimes 60,000 pixels. Now, so this is now a demonstration, right, of both the power and the weakness, right, of data analysis. So here what we're doing, we're reducing, right, we're basically extracting various characteristics from each city photographs, things like color, saturation, texture, and so on, and then we're using, a very kind of typical technique from data science, which is actually about 100 years old, kind of PCA, or in this case MDS, multidimensional scaling, where we're basically reducing each city to a point, and the points are situated in two-dimensional space according to the difference between the cities, depending on, of course, what characteristic images do you use. So, for example, we're using maybe about 16 different characteristics, and you can see that very different cities turn out to be very similar, but Bangkok and Tokyo are very different. Even Singapore, so you can see the Asian cities are a bit different, and Moscow turns out to be next to San Francisco. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, that if you want to derive some actionable knowledge and be efficient like a company, that's a bad thing. But if you want to think about things, that's a good thing. Unfortunately, you can make millions of these visualizations, and everyone is going to tell you a different story. So here we're only using the color characteristic with images, and we rerun the algorithm, and here we're getting a slightly different pattern, but we can see that something objective is still going on, right? Because both Bangkok and Singapore, the two Asian cities, are still like outside of a cluster of the rest. Okay. Now this is a great example of what I'm actually, basically I'm going to show examples of the work of my lab to show you what not to do, right? So this is, I think, beautiful visualization which we did of, which is an example of what I call aggregation, right? So basically we're looking at the location of people, right, posting images, Instagram images in Tel Aviv during 2 special days. So they're both very kind of symbolic days in Israeli kind of history with celebrations, the kind of Fallen Soldiers Day and the Independence Day. And by kind of connecting and colorizing the points, so the color corresponds, of course, to the time of day when photos are being shared, right? Morning green and the evening is red. And then I connected the points algorithmically if people shared the images within 10-minute interval. You can see how these 2 days have very different footprints, right? We have very different footprints, very different kind of images of city activity. So on one hand, it's beautiful, and this is exactly where we are today with big data. But I actually think it's terribly wrong. Because what we have to do is, we have to remember, these things we're looking at do not exist. These are imaginary societies which we created, because these people were not at the same time, right? It's aggregation. It's a completely idealistic social sciencey view of society. So the question is like, this is beautiful, and we've been doing these things, me and everybody else, for 10 years, so how are we not to do it now? How do I learn how to do it, right? So this is perhaps, I mean, you can just cut me when it's over. So this perhaps maybe, again, trying to deal with a very impossible question, right? Because we want to see patterns, but at the same time, we don't want to aggregate everything. So here, we took individual users, and it's a kind of matrix of scatter plots, where each scatter plot simply shows you locations of images each user shared in Tel Aviv over 3 months. And again, we're using the same color. And the next step, right, if I want to become a scientist, if I want to become like Ericsson, right, or, I would basically aggregate this, and I would basically reduce it to, for example, clusters, right? So here's users who post in the morning, here's users who post like on the way to work. But I want to stay on the level, on this artistic level of individuality, and I want you to enjoy, right, and see the diversity of everybody's social media behavior, right? So while you can find these clusters, I think in this case I didn't want to go to the next step. I mean, I could have just run the algorithm and it would reduce it to 5, 10, 3, whatever clusters, but I didn't want to do it because I wanted to see how we can kind of remain respectful of individuality while we're seeing patterns. Okay, I'm going to skip this one. So let me just maybe show for 2 minutes, right, the last one, the last project because this is maybe the most, let's say, relevant to kind of architecture, and I think I'll finish here. So this is one of the later projects of our lab, which was created December of last year. It was a commission for New York Public Library, so it's installed there in the part of the exhibition for 13 months on a 46-inch touch screen. And this was our attempt, again, to try to do something very strange, which is to give you a new way to navigate the city without using a map. Right? Because, of course, the social media and the mobile phones and the services led to this renaissance of mapping. So now the maps, more than ever before, has become our standard conventional ways to think about the city. So let's defamiliarize it, right? Let's make it strange. Let's show us the city without a map. So what we basically try to do, so this is the team. This is how it looks in the interactive part. So we basically try to create a kind of different interface to the city, where the city kind of consists from these layers of data, like a cake. So we have about, let's say, 13 layers all in all. Things like Google Street View images, Instagram tweet statistics, Instagram images, taxi statistics. And what we've done is to be able to basically get rid of a map. We said, as opposed to visualizing it over two-dimensional plane, right? We're going to select one street. So we're going to make a linear cut from a city. So we selected the longest running street, and then the oldest streets in Manhattan, which is Broadway, which used to be Indian Trail, let's say in the 16th century, and then we aligned all the data along the Broadway. So we basically used Broadway corridor as a way to filter different data sources. So eventually we ended up with 40 million images, social media images, and data points, right? And as you'll see in the video in a second, when you can navigate, what you can do is you can use your familiar gestures, so you can zoom out, and then you can move along Broadway kind of building by building. So we're using Google Street View images, or you can zoom out, and then you can see patterns, right, across the whole city. So once again, it's another attempt to try to combine our interests, right, a kind of human brain desire to see patterns and to aggregate information, and then at the same time our interest in the particular street, particular building, right, something which comes from science and something which comes to art, but as well as, let's say, solve a kind of maybe more technical problem, is how do you create the image of a city made from data? In this case, 40 million data points and images just making one street. Now, this is a collaborative work with amazing, some of the top designers in the world, so I don't take much credit. It's a work about 10 people, and the head designer is Moritz Stefaner, a kind of master visualization. But we definitely work on ideas together, so now you can zoom in, and then you can also click and see Instagram images at every particular point, so you can use your kind of gestures, right, to kind of open this up, and then you can move building by building, right, or you can zoom out and see kind of patterns, right, and then as you zoom in, everything opens up, right, so you start seeing individual kind of facades, and you also start seeing averages, right, averages for Instagram, taxi, tweet, and so on, and these averages have resolution depending on where you are in the city, right? So if I'm basically looking at the whole thing, you'll see averages for the whole city, for the whole Broadway. If I zoom in, I get averages for particular areas. So I think I'm going to stop here. I think I'm about 32 minutes. But I hope we'll have time to discuss, and thank you so much for listening.
Stay here for a second, Lev.
Okay.
I have something, maybe for you it might be a surprise, but your MIT Press book, New Media Language, was recently translated in Estonian and published by the Estonian Academy of Arts. So this might be something that even you're not aware of. Yes.
I knew it was coming, but I didn't see it, so if anybody in the audience is responsible, thank you so much. I was here, I think, last time around 2008, 2009. I had also a beautiful time, but meeting people from the Estonian Academy of Arts. And, you probably all can read English, but maybe a nice souvenir for your like mother-in-law. Or anyway, thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So,
Thanks.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great, huh?